Hello, and welcome to Talking Toddlers, where I share more than just tips and tricks on how to reduce tantrums or build your toddler's vocabulary. We're going to cover all of that, I assure you. But here, our goal is to develop clarity, because in this modern world, it's truly overwhelming, especially during these past 2 years. This podcast is about empowering moms to know the difference between fact and fiction, to never give up, to tap into everyday activities so your child stays on track. He's not falling behind, he's thriving through your guidance. We know that true learning starts at home, and Talking Toddlers, this podcast helps you develop that with clarity, confidence, and clear communication. So let's get started. Hello and welcome back to Talking Toddlers. I'm Erin Heyer, your host. And this episode, I would like to cover that 18-month to 24-month developmental period and looking at some of the specifics in that broad range and really dynamic growth period. But I want to move beyond just the basic skills and help share some of the nuances, because I think that parents are often given cursory checklists. And if you look on your state or the CDC, developmental milestone markers, they're very cursory. And I think part of it is that we don't want parents to overanalyze or worry or fret about all of the different expectations, for lack of a better word. But remember, my goal here is to help support you at home, to help you build what I refer to it as a rich language-based home environment. And through language, and it's the talking language, right? The talking and listening, but also the physical play and putting all of those pieces together. And so I'm targeting how we eat, talk, and play in those early 3, 5, 6, 10 years, but really focusing on those 0 to 3-year-olds, and to build your courage to continually ask questions, to be engaged, to be present, and be honest. So what I'd like to do is move beyond the basic skills and share some of the subtle nuances, especially during this 18 to 24 month, and then we'll do it again between that 30 month and 36 month, because those are dynamic growth markers. And to get your child at that 3-year-old mark, which is really an independent little guy or gal with great communication skills, good eating skills, good talking and social play, and it's this beautiful package, but there's a lot of stuff that's brewing literally and melding together underneath it all. And so we could look at some basic, first words and first steps and all of those, but I want to share some of the things that are underneath that you in your day-to-day life with him or her can really understand what's going on. And one little side note, though, in regards to premature babies, and if you do have a baby that was born early, I know that you know this, this is kind of basic recommendation, is that a premature baby is typically one that was born before 37 weeks gestation, right? And that typically reach milestones according to their due date rather than their actual birth date. So if your child was born 6 or 8 weeks early, their developmental path is more likely to match a baby that was born 6 to 8 weeks later, right? So this is known as the adjusted age or the corrected age. And you moms out there, you know this. But the other side to that is that according to the American Academy of Pediatrics, as well as us developmental specialists, most premature babies, I'd say 80 to 85, will catch up by their second birthday will catch up with full-term babies. If they don't catch up by their second birthday, then you as a family really need to dig a little deeper and figure out how you can help them close some of those gaps. But I'm still quite amazed at how little support families are given, I think, when you have a premature baby. I think the pediatrics office, the hospital itself, the whole medical community kind of leaves you guys on your own way too much. I mean, some of you might have a natural support system and all of that, and that's wonderful. But from the beginning of my career, I was always stunned at how little support or extra, because I think bringing a full-term newborn baby home in and of itself is daunting and overwhelming. And oh my gosh, we don't really have a manual. We have thousands of books that I don't have time to read or study. And yet, when you have a premature baby, I think you're given even less support. But that's just my perception. I want to be mindful when we talk about developmental milestones that if your baby was born early, and even 3 weeks is a significant amount of time, then I think you need to even be more vigilant. But I think in this modern day and age, every single parent needs to be vigilant because it's not easy. And I'm trying to make it easier or more comfortable for you all. So I encourage parents to cultivate a curiosity instead of a worry, right? That kids are malleable, kids are resilient. The human being, I think, is just remarkable. However, we cannot let them figure it out on their own. And I've shared this before that I swear every family I've ever met, the biggest regret that they have was that they feel like they waited too long to ask questions or to pick up that phone or to inquire or to not be dismissed by the pediatrician or the school where they say, oh, little Joey or little, Sarah she'll be just fine. Just give her a little bit more time. When your mama instinct, your gut, your parental heart and soul spoke to you saying, you know what, something's off here and I need to dig a little bit more. So ask yourself how other skills in the same area across development is going. So another big question I always get is, when is it time to call the doctor, right? And I encourage parents to discuss all developmental questions or concerns with your pediatrician. However, I'm really honest with you that pediatricians are often slow to respond, and they don't necessarily step up and think proactively. And if you then need to call the state or call your local school district or to call a private practitioner, then it's on you, because the pediatrician is going to, I just have to say this, unfortunately, they're often slow to respond. And so I have always, and my purpose here is to lean toward being more proactive. It's not only about getting early intervention, it's really about you, mom and dad and family and anybody else that's part of that tribe of yours in raising this beautiful human, that you then can adjust or build your home environment to help support any milestones that might be lagging or any questions that you might be having. And so always call your pediatrician, but also at the same time, don't wait until they get back to you or that you're put on a waiting list. At the same time, call friends and family, look for a referral, Google, start your own data collection. And what I say, especially in this day and age with with your smartphones, start videotaping. So then you can look across 3-week period or 3-month period, which is a long duration for a little baby, right? But you can say, look, this is where he was 3 months ago, and he hasn't made much growth when it comes to tummy time or crawling or eating or any of the other big, huge areas of development that we're going to look at. So be proactive. That's always my biggest recommendation. So the first area with this 18-month to 24-month, which is a huge dynamic, right, is to look at speech. And speech is that physical part of talking, is the speech sounds, is the articulation. Your 18-month-old or your 2-year-old has had a good, year and a half of eating all kinds of wonderful foods that we've talked about in the past that will physically support the speech and articulation skills, right? And so you're looking at them having several single words, right? At 15 to 18 months, they should have 20 words at least, minimum. Again, when I look at milestones, it's the baseline. And that they should be using simple phrases such as, mommy home, or car broke, or more juice, although I'm not a big fan of juice, but more water or more bath or whatever he's mooring of, right? But we want him to be using spoken words to represent needs, actions, objects, people, feelings, all of it. The other big thing in this 18 to 24 mark is that your child needs to be repeating words overheard in a conversation. Words that he does understand and are important to him, whether it's a friend's name or a certain park or a game or grandma's name or food that he's fond of or any of that, but he overhears that and then he repeats them. He could also pick up on new words that most of the time have a lot of emotion behind them. Quite common, they could be cuss words, honestly, because we usually say them with a lot of oomph, and they pick up on that and they feel the power behind it. So we have to really be mindful and thoughtful when we're dealing with an 18, 20, 24-month-old child who is really starting to listen and differentiate in his environment. We want him to be able to do that, but then we, as the grown-ups, have to be careful. Also, most children, as they reach their second birthday, a lot of that jargon, that babbling nonsense, strings of patterns are almost gone, that they're practicing the vocabulary words that they have, right? And it should be close to 200 to 500. And they're starting to put nouns and verbs together and nouns and adjectives together. And they're really starting to use this verbal speech for purposeful engagement. You'll also hear a 2-year-old ask questions by raising that intonation at the end of a phrase. And even if the phrase is a one word like grandma's, or swing, and they're questioning you, having a conversation with one or two words, but they're using that raised intonation at the end. They're typically a 2-year-old, the speech clarity, or what we call the speech intelligibility percentage, improves from 25 to about 50%. So half of what a 2-year-old says should be understood by someone who's not very familiar. So it could be not a complete stranger, but maybe, Aunt Susie, who he sees a few times a year or is familiar with. But that percentage of understanding, the message might not be understood, but the words that they're saying are getting clearer and clearer. And they're really using what we call a CVC structure, which is a consonant, vowel, consonant. So such as like hot or cup. That, the consonant at the beginning of the word and the consonant at the end of words, you can hear clearer. And that's important because there are some processes that we speech people look at to measure their ability to string sounds together to make words and words together to make sentences. But at that 2-year-old mark, they're really looking at differentiated speech sounds, all of the vowel sounds, but then understanding that these words have markers. And it's important that it's not just your pediatrician asks, how many words does he have? And you say 20 or 50 or, 200, but that it's the clarity and the intention behind it that's really important. And that it's not just walking around the house and labeling things or answering your questions. It's that he is using it to really engage with others with a purposeful intention. And so the next section that we really look at is that the meaning and concepts behind both his receptive language, his ability to understand language, and his expressive language, right? So somewhere around that 18-month to 24-month that they really understand an average or approximately 300 words. It could be 500 words, but it has to be several hundred. And I've mentioned this before in the past, they're really distinguishing between what is food from other objects. So at that 12-month-old mark or even that 15-month mark, they're still trying to, as you're introducing real adult food with them, they're still trying to figure out what this whole process of eating and, hunger and fullness and all of that. And so now as they mature and they're wiser about their environment, they understand, and that's concepts, that, this rattle isn't going to satisfy my hunger, isn't going to give me flavor in my mouth, but this, chicken bone will. And so they really conceptually understand the difference and are building. And that's the precursor to understanding categories and understand, how things fit together and how things relate. Like these are all clothes. This is all food. These are toys. These are, garden supplies or tools. And they're beginning to build this robust understanding through words and concepts. A 2-year-old or 20-month-old will imitate immediate events. Say you help him turn the top of a new toy off and you go, turn, pop. And he'll immediately do the same thing when it's his turn, right? He'll put it in his hand and say, turn, pop. And he understands how the actions and words in the moment are part of the event, and he's making that connection in real time, and that's really important to be able to measure that your child and you are present doing stuff together, and he's building on that moment. The other big piece that you'll see in this 18-month to 24-month shift is that they're really listening with intention too, that he listens to you when you name pictures in a book, and that they listen to the simple story, even if you change up the story or if you're ad-libbing. He is understanding that the words coming out of your mouth is relating to this shared book event and that there's meaning behind it. And so hopefully through all of your wonderful story and book sharing, sometimes you're reading them verbatim, sometimes you're just making it up as you go on, or sometimes you're just labeling things and asking simple questions, because that's ideal, right? But that you're building his awareness, which is building his attention. And that's key when we look at that 18-month, 20-month, 24-month, 30-month, we're looking at their ability to listen with purpose and to speak and communicate with purpose. The other big thing is that whole object permanence is fully acquired by this age. And again, one of the reasons why cognitively, this is important for you parents to see and to understand when you're interacting and playing and engaging, is because what that is telling us is that your son or daughter are developing the awareness that words are a symbol, right? And that things can be talked about or thought about or dreamt about, even if they're not present. And that's showing that the language is being stored for long-term memory and organization, and then being able to retrieve it and talk about something that's not present. When you ask them a question, oh, what did you do with Grandpa today? I went to the park. And then he can think about, I went on the slide, right? And Grandpa held my hand as we walked up the front part of the slide, or whatever the activity was. We want him to be able to imagine it in his mind. And then ultimately, when he's 6, 7, 8 years old, when he's reading to himself at 7 or 8 years old, then he's imagining in his mind what the written words are saying. So this is how that cognitive skill is being built. But it starts with age-appropriate object permanence at 18 months or 24 months, right? We also want him to recognize people, objects, and body parts, both in a picture and when you're talking about them. And again, it's being able to conceptualize in your head, in your thought, with language or picture form, right? When you talk about his best friend, Tommy, or you talk about your daughter's, favorite doll or favorite dress. And when you talk about different body parts, and you say, oh, your feet are so dirty. He looks right at his feet, right? And that he's able to connect your words with people, objects, body parts in the immediate environment. Also, at this age, that they respond to yes/no questions, typically by shaking their head one way or another, but they understand that concept of yes and no, and that questions and answers are that early stage of turn taking, early stage of conversation, and that you'll also see a 2-year-old who understands simple verbs, and that's really important. You say, what is the piggy doing? What's the piggy doing? He is sleeping, right? Or what's the boy doing in the picture, right? He is eating, right? To eat or to sleep. Those verbs and that action involved, that's really, really important to be able to understand conceptually. We're not just labeling things, right? But that things and people can do stuff, right? And that action is important. And then you'll also be able to and test all of these things out when you're reading a book, or when you're playing with the farm animals, or when you're, getting dressed. Can he follow simple commands without gestures? And that's the big thing that parents will often say, oh yeah, he understands almost everything I say, but they don't realize what their body language is saying to them, that they're pointing or they're looking, or that things go hand in hand, right? When you're in the bathroom and that, the next thing is to get a towel to dry off. But if you're standing in the hallway and you just fold your hands in front of you and say, can you go get me the yellow towel? I need the yellow towel, without looking in the direction of where the towels are. So play those games with them and really get a good feel for where they are with building their meaning when they use language and their conceptual understanding, right? So a lot of the understanding, and parents will often say this, and it's absolutely true, that kids, especially that 2-year-old, will understand a heck of a lot more than they're able to verbalize. And that's important to understand. So you need to slow it down and simplify it, because then that gives them time to process and to articulate, like I was just stumbling. The extended version, or some of the subtle nuances, is that, yes, you look at the amount of words, right? 50 words, 100 words, 200 words that they use. And typically by the time you get to 50 or 100 words, you stop writing them out. Then you want them to be able to comfortably name familiar objects around the house. And you can name them not by just pointing, but you say, oh, what do I drink with? What can you help, Mama? What do I drink with? Or, what goes on my feet? We're going to go outside. What do I need on my feet? And again, asking them those concrete questions in real time and having them imagine inside their head. Typically, a 2-year-old, as you all know, will begin to say no. Sometimes they say no when they really mean yes. So you have to kind of play that game a little bit. And sometimes you just ignore it, that they do know that they have a name too, that they will respond when someone asks their name. Not always, especially to strangers or someone that they're less familiar with, but they're able to identify themselves and their name. And another big developmental marker is that they're beginning to combine 2 words into phrases. And I've mentioned this before, it's a noun and a verb, so they know that things can do stuff, but it's also a noun and an adjective, right? That things can be described, like it's a hot cookie, right? Or it's a dirty cup, or that you can say it's a big ball, or this is a little ball, right? They can describe it. But it's really, really important that kids really are trying to put 2 words together. Again, what that's telling us underneath is that conceptually he's thinking and he's relating his life experience, and that these verbal words that are coming out of my mouth are representative of things, objects, feelings, and descriptors, as well as actions, like I said. And that he is using words to ask for things, especially food or people, right? And that he will invent his own words. And those are often what we call approximated words. So they might have the same intonation pattern or the similar word structure, but they'll make up their own words. And, most of the time, I really encourage families to use proper grammar, proper language structure, proper words. But if you call something special to him, then of course keep that. But always be shaping his language. So if he misrepresents something, that he can say water, but he still calls it wah-wah. Then you don't necessarily correct him, but that your model is the proper articulation pattern, right? You say, oh, you want some more water? Me too. I'm thirsty. Let's get water. And you just don't draw a lot of negative attention to it. There's a few more developmental categories. And so it's really, really important. And I think a lot of parents misread this category of play and movement. And because I think we as a culture, we as an American society have kind of moved kids too quickly into quote unquote academics. And I'm always having parents step back and look at social engagement and using play and movement as a means or the medium in which to understand. But some of their play and movement really is just telling us, showing us what's going on underneath. their cognitive learning and their relationship with their environment. So one of the key things is that they really begin to make believe at this stage, at 18 months, at 20 months, at 24 months, make believe like, feeding the animals, or make believe that they're driving a car, or make believe that they're talking on a phone, because they're showing us that they're having these higher order thinking that they're imagining inside their head, right? But they're also being really creative in their actions. And prior to this, when they're 12 months old and 15 months old, they're more in that exploratory phase, right? And they're more into touching and feeling and mouthing. Well, now they've lived enough life for 18 months or 24 months that they're trying to model, or they're trying to imitate what we do in real life, right? Take care of the baby, or wash the dishes, or build the tent, or dig a hole and, bury a doggy, or whatever the action is, but also to dress up and fly off the couch, and to sing and dance, and to be creative in their imagination as well. And that's really, really important, that they're not just dumping things or lining things up, or, sorting things, or that they're just flipping through the book, that they're actually engaging with these play objects, right? But the other maturation, when we look at play and movement, are some of these precursors to higher order thinking, like to be able to sort by shape and color, to be able to build a tower with 4 or more blocks at this age, to pull and carry toys while walking, right? We talk a lot about how to help them be independent with walking, between 12, 14, 16, 18 months. But now they've had enough physical development that they can carry things and walk and still have good internal perception of how to move their body in space and organize whatever task they're doing, whether they're, picking up their animals or collecting whatever they're collecting, cars or blocks or clothes or whatever they're doing. The other physical maturation is that they're independent with climbing on and off of furniture. Not always perfect, but they're really, again, getting a lot of opportunity to move their physical body in space and manipulate different environments inside your house and outside your house. Again, kicking a ball is also typically seen around 2 years of age. It's a slow ball, right? You're not playing full-fledged kickball, but that he has enough balance and physical organization to be able to step on one foot and strike a big ball, right? That's really important in wiring his body, in moving in sequence and timing. And so we often say that the brain is this timing machine. It's a timing machine when it comes to speech and articulation, in chewing. It's a timing machine when you walk in the hallway and don't walk into the wall or walk into people. And it's especially a timing thing when you're starting to play with balls or, sport-like kinds of things, even if it's just, catching or hitting a balloon, right? To be able to self-regulate and to adjust your body in this physical world. You should also be seeing your 2-year-old building their attention, and that they're a lot less shifty, right? That they can sustain attention for 2 minutes and 5 minutes and even 20 minutes, depending on whatever the task is, whether you're playing with, Play-Doh, or you're reading a book, or you're building a tower, or you're digging in the dirt. All of these things that they can sustain that attention for longer periods. And that they do like a variety of mediums, from clay to dirt to sand to water. That's that sensory process. And in a future episode, I think it's coming up next month sometime, that I'll really talk more about what sensory processing is and how we're building a network within network within network, and that his life experience in quote unquote play, whether it's movement or object play, but the sensory processing system is key. And so if a 2-year-old is sensitive, then it doesn't necessarily mean that they have a sensory processing deficit or that they have sensitivities. It's just perhaps telling you, I need more exposure. And more opportunity. And remember, well, like I said, when they were first introduced to a wide variety of flavors and tastes and textures, when you're introducing solids, then you need to give them the opportunity to feel a lot of different textures too, like clay and sand and rough things and smooth things and dirty things and muddy things and cool and warm, not hot, but to be able to feel it and be more and more comfortable. We're desensitizing them. And, some kids, I've known a lot of kids that really didn't like walking barefoot on the grass, and you just keep exposing them to it. You just, sometimes you don't have to walk. Let's just sit next door or sit on a blanket and sit really close. But the opportunity, and so you as mom and you as dad, look at these, how they react to different experiences. And, if your 2-year-old is still sensitive, then give them a little bit more opportunity to be exposed and to learn and to build and to build that sensory processing system where they're not so sensitive. So let me finish up play and movement. I was talking about having flexibility opportunities with a variety of materials like clay and dirt and sand and grass and wet and muddy and all of that. This is also a time where you see the beginning, the emerging skills of social give and take. Say, kids are playing on the playground and they're doing dress up, or they're playing with food or shopping or building a tower or something. You'll see that they're beginning to, you put in one, I put in one, you put in one, I put in one. And there's still a lot of parallel play as the predominant element, but they're playing nearer and nearer one another, and they're really beginning to not only physically understand, but have that emotional awareness that we're in it together. And then some of the precursors to academics that you'll begin to see with a 2-year-old or even an 18-month-old is that they're very interested in smaller tools like scribbling with crayons or markers or pencils or chalk. They also understand their body awareness more, so they'll begin to stand on their tippy toes to reach for something. And then the fine motor skills, again, going back to stringing beads or putting two items together with their bilateral, their right and their left hands working together at midline. You'll see that they should talk to themselves as they play because they're overhearing our conversation, and they know that doing things and interfacing with objects in their environment also represent or also can be represented through language. You'll see that they're much more independent, as if you have a 2-year-old or have recently had a 2-year-old, their independence is really striking because their physical ability to walk, to climb, to step, to move around things gains much more fluidity and automaticity. And so they are not thinking about how to move my body in space as much as, oh, I see something I want to go and investigate. And then the stair climbing, that can always be nerve-wracking because they are really, really wired to want to climb and move. And so they see stairs and they gravitate toward it and walking up and down, but they still need a lot of supervision. And so, that's that fine dance where us parents want to be close proximity so they don't fall and injure, and yet at the same time you want them to figure it out. And I know, like in my private practice, I have a therapeutic high chair that is designed, it has great geometry, and parents will often kind of gasp a little bit where I trust the high chair and the design of it, but I also would put my foot down on the bottom railing to stabilize it even more. And then I let the kids climb up and into it. And I give them verbal encouragement. Come on, you can do it. I like your climbing. Yep, that's good. That's great. Keep going, keep going. If they get stuck or if they're afraid, most of them aren't, then, I'll give them a little support on their bum or in their elbow or at the bottom of the foot, but 9 times out of 10. And in the beginning, especially with a 16-month or 18-month or a slightly smaller child or something, I've had many, many parents look at me like, what in the world are you doing? But it really is important that they get the opportunity to climb in and out of these chairs and to climb, into the little car that they're going to scoot around in, or, around pieces of lumber or wood that's on the side of your porch or whatever it is. They need to physically move in order to wire their brain. So keep that in mind, but with great supervision, right? And great, spot control, but let them struggle. And it's that 80-20 rule, and you want the brain to wire itself and they have to work through it. So don't hold back. And then along with all of these, of course, they're going to want to help with some simple chores around the house. And so that's always great to give them a little duster, a little dustpan, or a rag or a spray bottle. All of these tools and objects, that's object play for them, but they also feel like they're a part of the family. They're contributing, they're doing what the big people are doing. And that is really, really fun and cute and enduring. And sometimes it's more exhausting, but it's also highly necessary and developmentally appropriate. So the next section then would be looking at interaction and expression. And we talk a lot about that 2-year-old who should have 50 words and starting to put words together, right? But let's take a closer look at them, get some understanding of the finer nuances, so then you, mom, you, dad, you, grandparents, are more in it with them. Of course, you're going to see some more defiant behavior because they have an opinion now, but they also are testing what the limits are and consistency. They are looking for consistency, but they're also looking for how far can he go? How far can she go? And trying to figure out what's safe, what's not safe. But the defiant behavior is classic 2-year-old, but I think it's even more challenging with the 3-year-old because they do have much more sophisticated language. Their memory is remarkable, and they can really try to manipulate and negotiate through language to get you to comply, to turn the tables, right? But your 2-year-old is beginning to use those 2-word phrases, and it's much more purposeful. So there's more command, like move, they'll say to you, or possession, like that's mine. Or if there's a problem, they fall down and hurt their knee, and they'll say, owie, and they're using language to represent the real thing or the real immediate event. And as I said, they're increasing independence. They'll push back with words and body language. They're much more likely to imitate behaviors as well as words. So chores, the emotional connection that goes with some of the behaviors that they see. Like if we cuss, they don't know that that's a quote unquote bad word or a cuss word or derogatory or any of that, but they feel the emotional emphasis behind it, and that draws their attention. And so they want to imitate that. They will have more awareness of themselves separate from others, and that he or she has an opinion or a desire that might be different than yours. That's important. They're excited about the company of other children, so they'll run and meet them, and they're eager, or they'll wait by the window, and then they might disengage, right? So they'll greet them, but they don't know how to carry it to the next level. They don't have that social sophistication yet. They don't really know how to play with another child, but they're emotionally connected to other people, and they realize the world is getting bigger and bigger, and it's fun, right? But they don't know how to follow through yet, right? They're a little bit more verbal turn taking going on. And so they're trying. They know that they're supposed to say something to you, but they don't have the sophistication or the language depth to carry it to the next level. They will name objects in front of people and it's not that they're quote unquote showing off, or that they really are using it to say, hey, look what I learned today. They know socially that spoken language is part of this human connection. And so they're using their very limited repertoire, their little, tiny information stored in their back pocket, to the best of their ability. And so they'll start labeling stuff or showing you stuff because that's the level that they're at. They're very cursory, right? First step. But they want to contribute. So they're going to interfere with, say you're having a conversation with, your family or your friends or whatever, and they keep interrupting, showing you because they want to be a part of the crowd. And that's the same reason why a 2-year-old will often say, what's that? What's that? What's that? To elicit your attention, to elicit the quote unquote conversation. But because their social skills are so limited and unsophisticated, they don't know how to carry it out. Even if you start to talk about, the toy that they bring to you, the teddy bear or the truck or the puzzle or the book or whatever, they don't know quite well enough how to do that give and take and expand upon of the conversation, quote unquote, because they don't know a conversation. They just know that they want to be part of it, and they're doing the best they can. You'll see kind of this rise and then this fade of some separation anxiety. So it's pretty common 18, 20 months where they kind of stress out a little bit if you have to leave them with somebody else. But then closer to, 2, 24 months, 26 months, then they're more familiar of time. They don't have that time concept, but hopefully they have enough structure in their day that they know perhaps after lunch you come home. So they haven't experienced enough routine that they're getting a better understanding of the rhythm of their day, and they can think about it. So when you say, oh, I'll see you after nap, right? Say you're going to go to work, or you have to run some errands or take care of something outside of the house. If you give them that structure that you'll be back, then they tend to not be so upset. Again, this will peak and valley quite often during this developmental phase of, their second birthday, their third birthday, and their fifth birthday. So kids, it will escalate a lot more when they go off to kindergarten, because conceptually they get to understand that the world is getting bigger and bigger. It's not just their immediate family. It's not just their immediate neighborhood. It's not just the immediate community church or their preschool, but it's bigger and bigger. And so they worry, or they're unsure. And so that's pretty common. But what that's really telling us is that they're They're beginning to understand the dynamics and their role in this world, this life that they lead. Some kids, not all, will also be ready for potty training. And that goes back to a lot of the sensory processing development. And I've mentioned in previous episodes about the interoception system, which is the ability to feel, or your organs have senses on them that you begin to feel internal dialogue. And that's what it is, like when your bladder is full, or when you're hungry, or if you fell down and you hurt your arm, you can pinpoint it. You say, yeah, my arm is sore, or I'm hungry, or I'm cold, or I'm thirsty. Those internal feelings, they're able to register them and put some language to it. So that's why potty training can be introduced around that second birthday. And again, these are great estimations, but boys tend to be a little later in that internal or that interoception processing. Not always, but quite often a 2 to a 2.5-year-old can have a good idea about the bladder, but not necessarily about the bowels. So you let them lead the way with that. Always be open and encouraging, but give them the language so they can understand how it feels, and then they can start to express that in real time over opportunity. And then the last section that we really look at, or when we study developmental milestones and we're assessing or evaluating or consulting with families, is that grammar. And that's pretty important, because we don't want kids just to have a list of words. We don't want rote memory. We want them to understand the structure, and that they've had enough interaction with the adults in their life that they're coding the language. And that's key. And I've shared this, for 35 years, that every single baby in this world is a citizen of this world. Because when a baby is born, they're wired to learn or decode any language. And your child just happened to be here in the United States, and the primary language is English. And that's how the brain is then wired and coded. And those grammatical structures are important. So an 18 to a 24-month-old child will begin to understand some pronouns, such as mine, right? That possession. They begin to use words you and me, and to understand that we're separate, and that these different associations have different meaning, and then will result in a different feedback. They begin to follow directions using a couple of different spatial concepts, such as put it in the box, or take it off the counter, or put your boots on the boot tray, or hang your coat on the hook, or put it in the drawer, or don't sit on top of the table, right? So those spatial directions are very important, because as we speak in fuller and fuller sentences, those directives are often under stressed, and they're often softly spoken in the stream of the sentence or the question or the direction. And so we want kids to exercise the speed at which they process the words, and they can interpret it. So it's called auditory processing. It's also language processing, but taking in the language and understanding, and say, go get your socks and put them in your drawer. That's 2 directives. Get your socks, put them in the drawer. And so it's a lot of data. And when you're playing around in real time with your 2-year-old, to make sure that you listen to your own directives and understand the language, and perhaps if he didn't do what you asked, why? Was it because you spoke too fast, you gave him too many parts to the command, or he heard the first part, but he didn't really attend to the second part? There's a lot of different variables that we just become mindful of, and helping them understand to listen to the entire thing. And that just takes time and practice. And sometimes we parents expect too much and demand too fast, and they fall apart. And so we just want to be mindful of that. Because a lot of these things, when it comes to pronouns and spatial concepts, that they're emerging. So sometimes he'll get it, sometimes he won't. He'll be more alert in the morning and more frustrated during that witching hour of 4 to 6 p.m. And the other parts are that, like this next one, negation, he will begin to understand it and use it, like no coat or no bed or no brush, like he doesn't want to brush his teeth. And so he understands that that means I don't want that. But if we put negation in and say, give me one that is not yellow, that's a hard concept for a 2-year-old, right? Because he's going to look at say there's blue, white, and yellow blocks, and he's going to look at them, and he might just hear the yellow and pull that. But that flipping that chart, that's why when we say don't walk on the furniture, or don't put, your dirty cup on the table, or whatever the don't is, that negation is harder for him to process. It's too complex. And so he might hear walk on the furniture, but he didn't really process or interpret don't walk on the furniture. These elements to grammar are emerging, but it can be a lot. We call it a linguistic load, right? It's how much data can I perceive. One, I have to perceive it and hear it, and then I have to interpret it. So they are at this age starting to emerge with those possessives, right? It's daddy's car, or it's mine, right? And they will refer to themselves with the pronoun and their name, like me, Tommy, or me, Susie. And because they're beginning to understand it, give it to me, give it to you, that kind of differentiation. So about 33% of their speaken words will be nouns. We want to see adjectives, and we want to see verbs. 2-word phrases will be the noun and the verb, right? Dog, eat. Tommy, sleep, those kinds of things, but also that adjective. If something is hot or cold or dirty or more or less than. And then there's a term we use, it's called MLU, mean length utterance. And that just means that it's about, 1.8 words. So if you were to hang out with your son or daughter, you want them at least 50% of the time using 2-word phrases, and to really because that's telling you that he's learning conceptually how to interact with the world, right? So there's a lot of grammatical markers that are starting to emerge. They're not mastered. They're not, and yet you will see a 2-year-old with pretty sophisticated language. That's not that unheard of. And so when I'm looking at these basic developmental milestones, that's anywhere between the 50% or 50% of the kids will have it, all the way up to 75% of the kids. And that's where there's been some discrepancies in the last year or two, where the CDC, the American Academy of Pediatrics, are putting together different measures or adjusting some of the language used within these developmental milestones, because they indicated they thought that it was too confusing for parents and I think pediatricians. But how I look at it is that it's not that it's too confusing for the layperson or the new parent or even the nurse in the pediatrics office. I think that these developmental milestone charts were just too cursory, meaning that you just look at whether you have 50 words or you're putting a couple of 2-word phrases together. And it goes much deeper than that. And 2 words or 50 words is really the basic. And what I want parents to understand are these richer nuances when you look at their play and their movement skills, their ability to truly express themselves verbally and non-verbally, as well as in their actions, right? And how they interact on a day-to-day basis. And that's where I think the developmental milestone charts are weak. It's not the age cutoffs. A 2-year-old, a 24-month-old child should have a big, long list of words, should be really, really interested in being with the adults and interested in the children in his life, but not necessarily sophisticated enough to interact and play. But they have the beginning, the markings of that turn taking. They're interested and want to be engaged in the day-to-day life, the day-to-day routines. And their play, you can tell if you watch them from a distance, has meaning and purpose behind it. That 12-month-old or 15-month-old, they were still just exploring and touching and feeling and dumping and just very, very busy in both their thought as well as their actions. But now that 18, 20, 24-month-old has much more purpose and curiosity and interest and wants to be engaged and willing to listen. And that's the other key. Are they really, really listening to you? And that's why I continually tell parents to turn off the screen. I'm just telling it like it is. That flat screen, it's passive. It's not a good speech representation. It's not in real time. There's no interaction. It does not serve your toddler, your baby, anything. And so only use it in those moments where you need to jump in the shower, or that you need to go to the bathroom, or that, you cut yourself and you need to focus and find the bandage. But with all honesty, that 1, 2, 3-year-old needs to be engaged with humans, interacting and wiring their understanding, both physically, cognitively, and then with language. And so that's really, really important. It's the subtle nuances, not the big fat markers of does he have 50 words, which is really the basic level, but what is he doing with the words that he has? And what's he doing when he plays or interacts with the environment, with you and others? And that's rich, rich language. Thanks again for your time. If you're finding benefit, please share with your friends and families. I'm on a mission to really serve and support new moms, new dads, new families. Remember to subscribe and share, and I look forward to next week, and we'll continue with diving deeper into developmental milestones, but also how you can build your understanding and use everyday activities from bathing and walking to the store or brushing your teeth and eating and prepping food and all of these things to build his understanding, his language processing, his concept of this world. So thanks again, and I'll see you next week. God bless.